Hello, welcome to another Parallel Project Training podcast. These podcasts are recorded for the new APM PMQ syllabus that is launching in September 2024. Today, we're going to be talking about requirements management. My name's Ruth Phillips and I'm here with Lisa Regan, who's one of Parallel's senior trainers. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Ruth.
Are you looking forward to talking about requirements management today?
Yes, I'm ready to go.
Okay, fantastic. Let's go back to the syllabus. Let's have a look at the learning objective. We've got two learning outcomes for this one that really split requirements management into two separate areas. So the learning objective is that we've got to understand requirements management as the ability to capture and monitor the requirements of a project. Our first learning outcome is to understand how to establish scope through requirements management processes, such as gathering, analysing, justifying requirements and baseline needs. So let's start breaking that down a little bit. When do we actually start trying to capture and gather requirements, Lisa?
Well, in the business case, you would have higher level requirements, but digging down into the detail always comes in the definition phase as part of the PMP.
And who needs to get involved in doing this?
So, project manager for starters, gathering requirements is all about talking to people. You've got to talk to your key stakeholders. When we're talking about gathering requirements, it's eliciting. Is that the right word? You do it through interviews. You could do one-on-ones with people, with your subject matter experts. You could have a brainstorming session. You could have a focus group. You could gather certain people together and talk to them about the requirements. It's about gathering information, Not only gathering, but making a list. So recording, making a document, talking to as many stakeholders as possible, because you don't want to miss them out from this discussion, because if it's missed early doors in the gather phase, those requirements might get completely missed. It's a good idea to be as comprehensive as you can in the gather phase.
Absolutely. I found when I've been doing this that you can make a few efficiencies by starting a stakeholder engagement process alongside this. The people that you're going to be gathering requirements from are going to be those key stakeholders that you really need to be engaged and interested in your project. And the second thing is to really allow people time to think and reflect. As a project manager, you can get a bit frustrated. Why do they not know what they want? But actually, It can be quite a difficult thing to specifically, clearly, in a prioritised, measurable way, define what your requirements are. Often I find that people are trying to just get a better version of what they've currently got rather than thinking outside the box a little bit. Yeah. Somebody came up with a great phrase, people just want a better chariot rather than thinking about designing a car.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't know what it is that is possible.
They just want a gold version of what they've got. I understand.
Absolutely.
So, like you said, we're giving people time to reflect.
So we gather requirements, as you said, fairly high level in the concept phase, but then drilling down into them. So I guess that within definition, we move into the analysis of requirements. Tell me what we're doing when we're analysing requirements.
Analysing requirements is like a Venn diagram. You're trying to work out, have you got any gaps? If you're mapping out your requirements, if you do requirement A, does that mean you cannot deliver requirement B? Are they mutually exclusive? Is there any kind of overlap? If you satisfy one requirement, will that mean that you're automatically satisfying another one? Yeah. So the analysis is about trying to see if there are any gaps between or if there are any overlaps. But the real analysis comes with this technique called function cost analysis. So that's giving you detail about the actual value. So what's the requirement? What's the value of it to your organisation? Once you've completed that function cost analysis, tell your stakeholders, try and get a consensus.
We've recorded another podcast about conflict resolution, haven't we? Yeah. This is probably one of those areas where we see a lot of conflict because people are trading off their priorities.
Absolutely. People are people and they don't always agree. What's at the top of somebody's list might be halfway down for somebody else. It's definitely a negotiation piece to try and get consensus for sure.
Yeah. Alongside those stakeholders, those users of the project, what are the key roles within our project team doing that analysis and then also moving into the justification for the requirements?
Your subject matter experts are the people that are really going to help you on this, because they were the ones that will have the hands on the detail. But as project managers, we're not expected to know it all, but we're expected to know who to go to. Pull on those subject matter experts. This requirement, what exactly does it mean? What does it mean for our project? How are we going to deliver it? What are the cost implications? What are the time implications? How is that requirement going to come into fruition? Justifying requirements is a nice one for me. It's the Moscow analysis.
I love Moscow.
Must have, should have, could have, won't have. The way I've done this on projects in the past, get people around a table, get them to write the requirement on a post-it note, 4 quadrants on the wall or on a flip chart. Is it a must have? Is it a should have? Is it a could have? And is it a won't have? This is where we're tying requirements back to scope. Yeah, as the learning outcome says, how to establish scope through requirements. If it's a must have, it's in scope. Should have and could have might be. A won't have, it's not in scope. Defining the must haves, should have and could have are in scope if we've got the time and the resources. The won't have is important. You're saying we can't deliver this as part of the project.
Definitely. I love Moscow. I think it's got so many uses, particularly if we've got projects that have got an iterative life cycle. Moscow is used so frequently. I think any project, any requirements, justification benefits from Moscow. Another thing that I find useful as well to talk to stakeholders about as part of that process is not just thinking about the scope, but tying it back to the business case. You talked about the function cost analysis that we do. Which of those requirements really delivers the value, really delivers the benefits?
Yeah.
So that if we didn't deliver it, would we then fail to deliver some of those benefits? And so we've got to make sure that when we're prioritising, we're enabling ourselves to deliver the scope that will provide the benefits that we've claimed in our business case. There's lots of linkages between this exercise going on.
Yeah, absolutely. When you get to the end of justifying, you've got to tell people again, it is a big communications piece, requirements. So tell people, these are the requirements and this is the order we're going to deliver, just to stop any future misunderstandings.
Yeah, absolutely. I find iterative lifecycle projects are really strong on the requirements management process. They use some nice techniques as well. User stories. We were talking about how it's really difficult to just write down what your requirements are. If you write them in the sense of a story, it's a lot easier to actually be able to communicate what that requirement is. You know, when I'm a user, I'm trying to do this so that something else can happen. That's a nice technique to use. Also trying to visualize what things look like. Sometimes if you have a model or a prototype or something like that, people can look at it, feel it. It's a lot easier to say, yes, that's right, that's what I'm looking for, when you can actually see it and feel it. There are so many good techniques to do this. You're absolutely right. Communicating then what the requirements are, what that agreement has been, what the priorities are is so important. The last step there, it says on the syllabus, is that we've got to baseline needs. So what happens here?
So baseline is putting a line in the sand. So you've said, this is the agreement that we've made. Tell people about it. We've said at the end of Justify, we're going to tell people, but we're basically setting them in stone. These are the requirements. And when we move into deployment, that is part of the deployment baseline, part of the PMP. And if anything changes in the linear life cycle, you've got to go through the change control process.
We talk about iterative projects being a lot more flexible and scope is not fixed on an iterative process, which is one of the points of choosing that type of life cycle. But even then, when we're within a time box, it's not about a free-for-all. It's not about throwing in new requirements. You've got to manage that requirement process well, regardless of what type of life cycle you're working on.
Yep.
We've already talked about stakeholder engagement. We've already talked about business case as well, change control, quality. We'll be coming on to in another podcast. There's so many things that feed in and out of requirements management. Yep. And another one of those is configuration management, which it sounds awful, doesn't it? But it's actually one of my favourite topics. Let's have a look at the learning outcome that we've got to meet. We've got to understand now how to manage the scope. So we established the scope through requirements management. Now it's about managing that scope. We're going to talk about steps: planning, identification, control, status accounting, and verification audit. First of all, Lisa, demystify this term for me. What is configuration management?
At the heart of configuration is version control, whether it's of a document or if it's a physical item, whatever it is you're trying to control, versions are at the heart of it. Sometimes people go, oh, configuration doesn't really mean anything to me.
I remember a project manager very early on in my career. I was complaining about this thing called configuration management. And he said, well, as soon as you get more than one version of anything, you will be doing configuration management. The question is, on most projects, how well are you doing it? I'm sure we've all had some fails where configuration management has not been done correctly. It seems quite a small topic, but it's got such wide-reaching consequences.
Yeah.
knock-on effects to quality and change control as well. If we're creating different versions of things, we need to control that. And if you can't vouch that this is the correct, latest approved version, you can't really talk about quality.
Yeah.
So we've got a process. It's got a nice acronym, hasn't it? PICSA.
Yeah, I like PICSA. Planning, identification, control, status accounting, and audit at the end. So shall I start with planning? Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
So planning, generically, it's about who's going to do it, who's going to do the configuration. Is it going to be a specialist? Will it be the configuration librarian? Yeah. Will it be someone from the PMO? Depending on the size and the complexity of the project, it could be that the project manager is expected to do it, because sometimes it's not that onerous of a job, but it can be. If you're working for a multi-million-pound aircraft manufacturer, configuration, there's more than one person does the job. Yeah.
That's a really important point that you've made there. Because this is about everything that we're producing on our project. It's not just about documentation. It's about the things that we're producing, the widgets, the code, the training materials. All of this comes under the scope of configuration management, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And we put together a plan. Of course we do. We're good project managers. We like a plan, configuration plan, part of the quality plan, also part of the PMP, and it details roles and responsibilities, what kind of activities you're going to carry out, such as identification, control, and auditing.
Yeah.
So, plan in place, we go away and then we identify the configuration items. Second stage in the process.
What are configuration items?
Configuration items for me comes from the PBS, the product breakdown structure. So a configuration item could be one thing from the PBS, but it could be a group of things. Dependent on the size and the complexity of the project, you might group things together, depending on the level of granularity you want to get to. But the product breakdown structure is where that information comes from. It would help you with the numbering system that you're going to use for configuration. That would come from your PBS.
You can break stuff down, and it's about that value. What's the value of managing this to the lowest level of granularity? Yes, you'll get more control, but it will be an administrative overhead doing that. If you don't pick the right level, you're not going to have enough control. So I think using the PBS is great advice, because if we've broken it down to a certain level for planning, that's a good level of granular detail for us.
That's right.
The only other thing for me is then different versions.
Right.
You might have some draft versions of something or something that's in test. How do you identify when something has been approved, signed off, and anything like that? You've probably had the experience like I have of opening up a file folder and seeing some randomly named documents in there, and you think to yourself, wow, what on earth are these? It's got to be something that relates to the PBS. Is a sensible, logical naming convention so that people can identify what this is without too much trouble. What about control?
So control is where it's actually happening. We've got the configuration items in place. When a change comes along, this is about how we're going to deal with it. Having the processes in place. Again, project manager is at the heart of this. If you decide to action a change, this is where the configuration process, the light switch is on. We go to our item, we check it out, open for change, we make the change, and then we check it back in. And it's that traceability of it, checking it back in, making sure that everybody's told that change has been made, and making sure that all the records are up to date.
Systems today make this so much easier for us to do. We can protect access to certain things. We can control approved versions. There's track changes. You can check it in, check it out. It can all be really well managed electronically. When we're thinking about more physical products, though, we've still got to use similar types of techniques, but it'll happen in quite a different way. Let's say if we were building a house and we had to change something, we'd still need to make sure that the right person was making the change, that change was made
absolutely.
and protected as well. It's easier to think about documentation, but it applies to all sorts of
to physical products as well. Yeah, absolutely. Once we've carried out the control, we've checked it in and we've checked it out, the next stage of managing scope is the accounting. I always think of it being like a bank account. So it's a log of what's been going on. We just talked about the change control. So the status account talks about things like the identification number from the PBS, who was the person who created it, the date it was updated, what's the current status, is it out for change, is it closed, what's the latest version number? It's giving you that traceability. And at any point, anyone can come along and say, where are we up to with this particular line item? And you can look at it, you say, such and such body checked it out on that date. They made this change and it came back in a week later. Now we're on version 2.1 or whatever.
Status accounting doesn't sound the most exciting step in the process, but it's so important to underpin the control. And it provides such great information for your reports and your reviews.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So finally,
what is the scary step?
The final step, audit. If we're talking about audits on this course, the PMO are the people that can help you, because audits, same as a generic audit, not just a configuration audit, they've got to be independent. So someone will come along and it could be as simple as just saying, what version are you on? Can you show me what version are you on? Yeah. So those kind of audits can be done at any time. They're not tied to a certain phase of the life cycle, but usually you'd see them done at the end of a phase to clear the decks, if that makes sense.
It's really good housekeeping process, isn't it? Your status account does need to be checked. Those are our records, but does that actually match the reality and what it says at the bottom of the document, at least at the end of each phase? Check everything's placed. That's what the records say. That's what the outputs within our scope actually say. Great, everything agrees. And of course, it's part of the closure of your project and handing things over in transition.
Absolutely.
It's really important to make sure that the people that now will be responsible for looking after and maintaining this actually know what they're getting. So I think our message on this one is keep on top of it, and to use configuration management as a way of controlling what it is that we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ruth.
So I think that we've covered everything that we need to for requirements management. 2 learning outcomes there. First of all, establishing scope through requirements management, and Lisa talked us through how we gather, analyse, justify requirements and baseline our needs. And then we've just talked about the configuration management process, which is how we manage our scope as we are then actually deploying our project. And we talked about PIXA, planning, identification, control, status accounting, and audit. Fantastic. That's been a really interesting session. Thank you very much, Lisa.
Thanks, Ruth. No problem.
Thanks.